Hello everybody to episode 2 of my Planet Coaster 2 series. Welcome everybody, and today we are building a restaurant, a playground area and a Helter Skelter slide in the style of a windmill. Here you see me beginning with the restaurant build. I try to use more of the colors and the style of the brand of the park. So there are the typical light tan walls and green hill backgrounds. And then I tried to use the resort balcony wall to have kind of interior tiled wall, because in this restaurant I'm trying to do something like an implied interior. I found that this wall is kind of weird because when scrolling away from it, it completely transforms into something that looks more like metal. Does anybody know why it does that and how I can prevent that? Because I really like the part, but this look is really weird. Maybe it has something to do with the draw distance or level of detail. I'm not that technical minded, even though I teach computer sciences, but yeah, I don't know what exactly is happening there. So if anybody of you has a hint on how I can get rid of it, I would be really glad. So this build is a small quick service restaurant where you can just pick up a tray with your food or drinks and then put them onto a table and have your food. I plan to build a small patio for people sitting down, enjoying their food and enjoying the scenery. Here I noticed that I can't get as many shops in as I wanted to, so I use a small trick. In order to have all the tolerances and needs of the guests in mind, I sink a few vending machines into the walls. They will just be visible from the inside, and there they look like a big kitchen counter or something. So the guests can still buy stuff there, but the vending machines will be invisible from the outside, and as such all the needs of the guests are met even without being able to put as many counters into the building as I wanted to. I use some workshop pieces for the kitchen interior, and the one I end up using is from Shot, and then I start placing some of the kitchen stuff into my restaurant interior. As I said, I'm going to do an implied interior. I want to have a good view from outside the building, but I won't be hyper realistic and place everything that a QSR or a quick service restaurant needs inside of there. First, I'm fiddling around with the parts, and as they're not saved as different scenery groups, I fiddle around a bit with selecting them. But after that, it works out fine, and I even got the height right. I place an ice cream machine, I place all the counters, and I place a cooler with drinks. I try to fit in possibly everything needed for a kitchen of this size. And then I wonder, that's weird. I would need some kind of a backstage area where there are more refrigerators and more boxes where stuff is stored. So I start building that. I place some refrigerators into the back. I try to test the height of the things, but placing two above each other doesn't work, even though I could scale them. But in the end I decide two suffice, and then place some more boxes inside. Here's the problem I had, which I spoke about in my first episode. These doors cannot be mirrored, and as such, the doors cannot be placed on the inside and on the outside in a way that they are convincing. I know I could just go ahead and build the wall three-dimensional, so I could have one door inside, but I think this looks kind of weird. So in the end, I just accept that the door on one side has their handle on the other side not exactly mirrored. I edit around the walls a bit so they look okay, and then I start thinking about a roof. I thought one of the gift shop clutter set would be okay there. Perhaps kids can get some nice stickers with some kind of a Happy Meal equivalent. I added around the path so people don't walk through the walls, and I don't want the curb to be seen on the building. I tried to create some elevation for the restaurant for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is, in my imagination, parents can sit in the restaurant and watch their kids have fun on the Helter Skelter or have fun on the playground. And on the other hand, I wanted to have a bit of a panorama for the patio where people can enjoy the scenery. Me and roofs, it's always the same. I try to build a nice looking roof, then I will endlessly try to fight the Z-fighting. You will see me in this video do this a lot. It's the constant Z-fighting that I'm doing that actually makes these builds take quite a bit of time longer. If you have any tips or tricks for me how to do this better, please let me know. Then I do some trim work. I like my walls to have a kind of basement or foundation to make them look like they're not just standing on empty ground, to have a bit of an anchor to the ground. I closed up the walls here. I still didn't like it the way it looked, so I wanted to do some more trimming work, which I did right there. I'm still having problems with finding the right parts. For example, what is a beam, what is a column, what is a pillar, what is a plank, and sometimes the naming conventions of Planet Coaster actually puzzle me. You will see this in a later part of the video where I'm looking at the Viking stone wall, which isn't called Viking stone wall, it's called Viking fence. It's made out of stone, it looks like a wall, but it's a Viking fence. I don't get these naming conventions sometimes, and yes, I am making it a bit harder for myself because English is not my mother's tongue, so I need to translate my German to English and then into game language, and this is quite hard for me. But on the other hand, German translations of games are often quite bad. I remember hearing from people who playing Ark with me some really hilarious terms that are extremely weird and bad translations, so I prefer to play my games in the original language, in this case English. I'm doing some support work to make the building a bit less blocky and to have a bit of variation. I fiddle around with this quite a bit to actually be okay with the support I do, but I had a real vision in mind to have a kind of cover in front of the restaurant counters because people don't want to wait in the rain until their food is done. More Z-fighting. This always happens in between my builds. I notice, oh no, there's another edge poking out, so I need to fight the Z-fighting again. Here I continue with my support work, and then I decide to use the Viking fence, or yes, the Viking wall decoration with a cross trim for the outside of the cover too, to give it a bit of a more stylish and designed vibe. As I already told you in my first video, I tried to reuse theming elements because I think this park reused many of their styles and theming elements, which brings me to the question, when were these buildings built? I think it was built around in the 90s. So the park you are seeing right now is how the park was built in the 90s or the late 80s. This is because of 2 reasons. Because I want to put some more vintage rides in, like Vekoma loopers and Sierra Tivoli coasters, and I think the park should have started at that time. And my inspiration is how the Safari Park Stukenbrock looked at that time. Many things have changed in theme parks, but this is actually the time where I was a kid, so I want to be a little bit nostalgic and build the first part of the park like it was built when I was a kid and visited Schloss Beck or Stukenbrock. I found this really nice decorative piece and I wanted to look at like tulips because, as you see later, this restaurant will have many planters with tulips in them, so I thought this would be stylish. The roof was actually lacking for me, so I decided to give it a decorative trim, and because I liked it on parts of the roof, I just continued it for the rest of the roof. I try to use advanced move copy where I can and then try to fiddle around a bit until I like how this stuff looks. These straight edges are easy, and even the front facing roof parts are easy, but when it comes to the inner roof parts, the inner edges, I struggle a bit because I just eyeball how it possibly could fit in there. Even we have full control of the pieces, it's really hard to gauge how I have to turn these pieces to have it actually fit into these inside edges. Which reminds me that I forgot to place gutter pieces on this roof, which I will do later then. But not in this video, because I forgot the whole time. I wanted to have a different color on the roof, so I try out a few colors, and I love that color so much that I actually go back to my entrance area and color the roofs of the guest service buildings and the toilet the same color. Here I forgot one edge, and then I place more of the wall planters. I still really like that, and I think it conveys the message of this park. This park at least tries to be environmentally friendly, even though theme parks seldom are, but they at least try and do their best to produce energy in a sustainable way and to isolate their buildings with greenery on the wall. I imagine, as I said, that this park was built in the 80s, late 80s or early 90s, and I imagine the wall planters actually got added later because at that time people weren't that environmentally conscious. I tried to vary the pattern of the ivy a bit because it wouldn't look good if all of them were the same. So I add some, I remove some. I wanted to give it a bit of variation. I created it like the walls that are not needed for doors or counters are decorated with these wall planters. Here you see me do what I announced earlier, changing the roof colors to the new roof color I did for the rest. Here I noticed that I sunk the roof too much down, so I correct this. This is something that always happens to me. I scroll over my park trying to see what there is to do, and then I notice there's an error here, there's a mistake here, and then correct. And of course there was more Z fighting. After that I turn back to my restaurant build, and then I start building the patio. I love this part, the Planet Coaster fence too, even though I again don't understand the naming convention. This is a small plaster wall, a small plaster curb, even a small plaster fence. If I type in plaster, I don't get this part. Here I use a mythology fence, but I think this is okay for the theme of my park. I also think that many of the pieces in different themes in this game are generic enough to use them for kind of a generic theme. This is tooting a horn that many YouTubers already tooted into, like John T, like Rudy Rancamel. I think many of these pieces are generic enough to use them for generic themes like I'm doing at the moment. My theme is forest, so I use wood part. Another question I asked myself is when, concerning the time of the year, we see this park. And I decided this park is in early to mid-spring. Of course, there is a time and date given from the game when it's spring, when it's summer, when it's winter and all of that, but I can't plant everything anew when the season change. So I decided to have the park in spring. That's why some of the wild garlic is blooming. That's why we have blooming tulips. That's why we have blooming primroses and all of that. Here you see me building a planter wall. Use the often used plaster for it. I love plaster parts. And then there's another struggle. I really like these planter parts, but they're also very, 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 very vulnerable to the Z-fighting problem, which I'm working on all the time. Sometimes I don't get how other people don't seem to have these problems. Am I doing something wrong? Anybody have some tips and tricks for me how to do that better? For me, this is always work of patience. So yeah, I'm using my custom scenery brush here, and this is something I do very often. I brush some scenery in to have kind of a randomness, because there is no random rotation in Planet Coaster 2 at the moment. And then I correct things and perhaps manually plant some things. I switched my footage from ×8 speed to ×10 speed, and I hope you enjoy this. Of course, this video is still very long, but I try to edit it a bit better. But I hope you can enjoy my content. I'm always in a pickle with that, because I want to present something when a section or a big part is done, and when I have something to present to you. Otherwise, I think my video wouldn't just be a complete impression of what I'm doing. But as I'm so slow, it just takes around an hour of the video to just have this quick service restaurant, the playground, and the Helter Skelter build. Are you people okay with these longer videos, or do you want to have shorter videos with shorter parts and maybe just a quick service restaurant and then another video for the playground and then another video for the Helter Skelter? Or do you want to have me keep this as it is? Here I'm doing the planters. As we only have one kind of flower in the game, I'm working mostly with colors of the flowers to give the impression which flower it is. These should be tulips. I use these planters as hanging planters by just raising them up and placing them near the fence. I then look for a good kind of garbage bin, and I think I found one, because the park just bought some stock garbage bins and they only had some say in the coloring, so they wanted the top plate to be green, but otherwise they are pretty much stock. I do some terrain work and I notice something. The terrain of mud actually looks kind of more earthy to me than the actual dirt. I don't know why that is, but I always think earth should be more dark and brown, especially in the temperate region, Germany, where I'm living. Here I'm looking for playground parts, and there are some great ones, and the ones I actually used are the climbing wall playground by Bettina, the playground by Mark_MB, the playground by TD Master Builder, and the jungle playground by Josh IM. I downloaded a few more, but I don't need them in the end, so I just told you about the parts I used. Of course, I could and perhaps should have built all the playground parts myself, but as I'm still kind of a beginner, or at least not a well-gifted builder in this game, I found there is no wrong with using some parts from the workshop. I don't use a ready-made playground from the workshop though. I select different parts I like and that fit into my style and my imagination of the background I want to have here, and then edit them and make them a little bit more unique and mine. For example, I tried to recolor the climbing wall, but in the end I didn't find the climbing wall to be to my taste, because a children's climbing wall on the playground in Germany at least doesn't have ropes and all of that. A rope climbing wall would actually take some attendance, be bigger, be a little bit more pronounced, but a children climbing wall should be smaller, so the children don't hurt themselves when they fall down, but they're easily accessible without an attendant, perhaps just with parents watching over the kids climbing. So I made the climbing wall pretty much smaller and removed all the rope and all that stuff. I wanted to have a sand playing area, so I add that and rearrange the playground a bit to have it fit better. I use some of these bouncy swinging things, I don't know what they are called in English, but I find them to be very charming and they are used quite heavily here in Germany. Concerning my scenery brush, I use a scenery brush with many parts from the wild garlic plants because a few years ago I went to rehab because I was very sick. I had vestibular neuropathy and that was quite bad. And there I was in Bad Nauheim in Hassia, Germany, and it was quite a forested area. And there all of the forest was pretty much covered in wild garlic. So for a park in spring in a forested area, the ground being almost completely covered by wild garlic is realistic to me. The other parts I used for my scenery brush are ferns and rhododendron bushes. Ferns to give it a little more of a green coverage and some height, and the rhododendron bushes to give it even more height and even more variation in the greenery. Here I'm placing a fence for my playground, and you saw me placing some picnic benches over there so some parents can sit there and watch their kids playing. I think this is still a huge gap with Planet Coaster 2, because I think playgrounds, play structures, or perhaps for the water parks, children's play pads, water pads, everything of that nature is still missing. We had, for example, in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, the hedge maze, we had the miniature golf, we had these space rings, some playgrounds, children's attractions, all of that are severely lacking in Planet Coaster 2 at the moment. So all we can do at the moment is to place these non-functioning structures that look well, that are good with our Lego bricks, but they are not used, and that's quite sad. I use a small trick here because I place 2 drink vending machines on the background of my play structure so that at least people go there, use these vending machines, and at least I have the illusion of people wanting to go onto my playground. I start building a simple cover for the vending machines because they shouldn't get destroyed by rain or too much sun or too much heat. I try to have it look quite sparse and minimalist, but also woody and rustic. And in the end, I'm glad how this one turned out. By the way, I simply still love the music of Planet Coaster and Planet Coaster 2 and Planet Zoo. It's one of my favorite game soundtracks there is. The other game soundtrack I really like that much is the soundtrack of Ark Survival Ascended, or earlier Ark Survival Evolved. I think a good soundtrack can make or break a game, and Planet Coaster is really good with a soundtrack. I didn't want to have the vending machines placed in the raw sand, so I built some kind of wooden floor, but actually with this part it looks like some sand fell over it, and this is something I really love. And then I start building the Helter Skelter. I don't know, I think the Helter Skelter was part of the pre-order bonus or perhaps a part of the deluxe edition, I don't know. But I really love it for my first build here because this part of the park should have more of a playgroundy and more of a family park and children's park vibe. I fiddle around with scenery brushes, but after that I decide, okay, no, I don't like the scenery. I don't like how the trees and brushes are at the moment, so let's do that completely new, and I restart it. I use the default brushes for park trees, the default brush for tiger trees, and the default brushes for big temperate trees, because I want to have something that is kind of a mixed forest with some leafy greens, with some needled greens, and some smaller and bigger trees. And here you see something that I almost do for hours and hours. I place some greenery with my custom scenery brush and then correct it to have it not reach over the path and not reach over some curbs. I find that the chaotic nature of the scenery brush is quite good, but I want to have more trees and even more trees, so I plant some manually, because this actually should be a very foresty region and a very foresty park. So I plant trees and plant even more trees and use the scaling and the rotation to give it a bit of variation. I don't always remember, but most of the time I do. In the end, the area should look quite lush and green, with many different trees, many different plants, and many different planted areas. I fiddle around with the pathing a bit because it wasn't to my liking, and I still love the new path tools. Stuff I'm doing here wouldn't be possible with Planet Zoo or Planet Coaster 1. Sometimes the path tool can be a bit fiddly, but if you fiddle around enough, it works out in the end. Some parts the planting doesn't work well with the scenery brush, so I gotta correct and even use just Ctrl D or Ctrl X to move and copy plants around and plant manually. With my plants I also try to follow the tips, or at least some of the tips from N7, aka Mike Sheets. He said you have around 3 different kinds of brushes. You should have a palette with around 3 kinds of brushes or bushes or ground coverage. So the rhododendron bush, the ferns, and the wild garlic are these 3 things for me. And then I start recoloring the Helter Skelter, and I thought since the beginning of me playing that game that this Helter Skelter building actually looks like a windmill without the windmill part. So I test out a few of the windmill parts, and after I decide to use the big cloth one, I put it on there with a bit of a tube for keeping the distance to the actual track, so this building looks like a windmill. I decide to use the Viking fence also because I like the feeling of this queue to not be so much of a don't die fencing, because with a Helter Skelter you don't need this don't die fencing. You just need some fence to show the kids, okay, here's the line, you should stand in line here and don't queue jump, but you don't need such a big fence to show them don't go here, otherwise you would die. I still wish we could remove the curbs. Covering the curbs with a stone is hard enough. If there wasn't a curb, this kind of work would be easy. I could even do some floor covers and maybe use a wooden deck instead of this queue. At least in the next update they said they would remove the big Planko logos there. I tried to cheat here with resizing and I hope it works out fine. I think it's good. Copying parts always is a time saver, but sometimes it doesn't work out. I also use the Viking fence as a fence for the slide area, and I really don't like the rounded edges here. I really think it would be better if we could choose if the curb around the rides had square edges or round edges, or even better, just remove the curb there also, so we could do ride covers as we want them. I do some light theming around here, some sacks of grain, some boxes, and a bigger box, which in my imagination is for putting mats into that, because as this slide stands, I think this Helter Skelter should be a mat slide. I place some rhododendron planters inside to have a splash of color there, and then start testing the ride. And now there is this absolutely ridiculous thing. Look at that. This Helter Skelter costs over $90 to ride. I don't know how Frontier calculates the ride prices. I chose bargain there, so it's a bargain to pay $90 to ride this slide. I won't correct it though, because this is a franchise park, so finances are an issue. But 90 euros for this slide, this is ridiculous. I think the balance of this game is quite wonky. Here, I tried to recolor my planters to my usual light tan color, but in the end I really don't like it. I thought, oh, this fence color is so great, and in the end I just copy that color and give that color to my planter areas too, and then I like it. I use these arches because I think they're quite beautiful, and yes, I think the staff of the park has the time to use a hacksaw to cut them into shape once a year or so, which is something you actually have to do with your hedges. Then I create a path stamp, which I want to place on my path to create a planter area inside of my path. Again, these kind of advanced editing tricks with pathing are from Ruble Trillions and Tagi 3D, so if you want to know about these, watch their video. I fiddle around with this planter area a bit because I wanted to avoid congestion to the right of it, and I wanted to have it a bit smaller. Then it's raising, smoothing, and using a scenery brush. Correcting the scenery brush, and then planting a few trees later. I want another plant area, so I just stamp delete some path and fiddle around with it a bit, so it's to my liking. Here I plant the trees in these areas, and I use rescaling to have a bit of variation in there. After that, it's detailing, placing bins, editing the path a bit, placing benches, and placing some more foliage where it is needed. On these kinds of narrow spaces, the foliage is better set by hand. There I use a trick that is interesting. You normally can't use Ctrl X and the advanced movement tool with benches, but if you select a bench and a bin, you can actually use advanced move on them. Here I put together another planter, and these flowers actually should be primroses. Primroses bloom pretty much the whole year. I have primroses at home here, so I use the orange blossoms there to at least imply that these are primroses. These are quite easy to keep and to nurture, so I think a few planters of primroses shouldn't be a big problem for the park staff to keep track of and take care of. The garbage situation actually reminds me that I need to get some staff, but this is not something you will see in the video because this is not a management tutorial, this is a creative build. Here I want to place a sign in front of the Helter Skelter, and I'm really still quite sad about the game not giving us custom billboards, because I want to use custom billboards as signs. I simply don't have the ability to get them into the game. I hope this gets patched soon. I'm always struggling with custom signs. I really envy the people that make great custom signs. I try to use art shapes, I try to use different parts, but they don't come out like I want them. I use this trusty wooden piece to create a frame for them. Maybe they might look better then, but I still don't like it. So I look for another piece and I found this interesting resort window curtain. And that one actually looks quite good, but it's not large enough. So I turn it around, try to place one over the other, but I can't get them to look seamless. So I wonder what to do. And then I have the idea to just color the bottom one green, so it keeps with the theme of the signs having this kind of green underside for a green landscape. And then I try to place some parts on there, but nothing turns out to be to my liking, so I just use fonts then. These are placeholders anyway. In the end, when there are custom billboards, I will use custom billboards as signs. I really don't know how people do the cool signs with the art shapes. I've watched Masked Bandit's video on it, but for me it doesn't work out. I think the art shapes are just too large and I don't want to use mods at the moment. I know there is a mod that enables much larger scaling ranges, but I don't want to use mods at the moment because in Planet Zoo I already had the problem that I use mods regularly and a whole park just got lost because one mod got updated and when starting the park it always crashed, so it was lost forever. So after doing that sign, I will leave you with an overview of the new section of the park I just finished. I hope you had fun with this video. If you want to, subscribe and like the video, and I wish you a great day, night, evening, whatever, whenever you're watching that video, and I hope you stay fluffy and creative. Bye bye!